Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Redpill, joined as always by my co-host, Dr. Benway. Dr. Benway, how are you this fine morning for me, evening for you?
Pretty good. Eventually, I will be asleep in the fond reverie.
Ah, yes, and for me, it's just the start of a brand new day. I actually kind of enjoy doing podcasts in the morning. You know, it's sort of like, it gets me going in the morning, and I feel as if I've accomplished something before I start my day. So it's yeah, very nice. Anyway, we are going to talk about something that's been near and dear to both of us, and which is the line separating the public from the private. And let me just give you guys a little bit of background as to how the good doctor and I arrived at this topic. What happened was that we've been noticing that, people are scrounging around for people's private affairs or things that happened in the past or things that they said here and there. And, basically using it to torpedo people and to besmirch them or strip them of their credibility. And, what is the properly public and the properly private? Because this also goes to the issue that we discussed just a few episodes ago of the tethered life, where you never have a moment for yourself. You're always on call because of your cell phone. So what is this issue of the public and the private? And why is it that the line has been blurred? And that's why we're interested in talking about this issue. And Doctor, what do you have to say about this initially?
Well, I think before we get into it, I think you had a good story about the one photographer for the New York Times. What was his name?
Bill Cunningham.
A guy who was Bill Cunningham. He was obviously gay, and yet never really, I don't know if he acted upon it or not, but he certainly never made a public issue or publicly discussed it, right? Isn't that right? And I remember you told me that, and it reminded me of at least 2 or 3 other examples where I could cite similar to that, not perfectly. But one was the author Maurice Sendak. Those of you who are of a certain age will remember he wrote children's books, namely Where the Wild Things Are, In the Night Kitchen, Outside Over There, all sorts of more interesting, intelligent, storybooks for children. Yeah. He was gay, but first off, he didn't want to be gay. Because he didn't want to embarrass his parents. He thought it was just something that he shouldn't have.
A weakness of character.
Been burnt. She shouldn't have had. He certainly, that didn't stop him from having a relationship with someone, and he didn't go out of his way besmirching people for being gay. But he never made it a public issue. He certainly never discussed it with his parents. He said they went to their grave not knowing, and that was by his choice and decision to make sure that would happen. Yeah. And outside of near the end of his life, talking a little bit about it because people, were interviewing him when the movie Where the Wild Things Are came out, he never really made a big issue of it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar, even though Gore Vidal did talk about it, he never really made a big issue of his personal sexual life. He never really thought he was invested in gay politics and gay liberation. He thought it outside of, removing certain sodomy laws, never thought it was much worth his time to discuss it. And even like Fran Lebowitz, she's never yet come out to say that she's gay, because she doesn't think it matters. There's an old crop of a lot of these folks who still operated under the assumption that all of this was their private affair. They certainly thought, even in the most extreme case of them, they thought, well, we have a right to do this, but we're certainly not going to make a spectacle of it. And that's much different from now, in that I get the sense, more than a sense, I know this is the case, where it's not just you have your private life and you're unimposed upon in your private world. It's that the private life is now public. It's not about you just going home and having sex with another man, or if you're a woman, another woman. It's about you being proud of that, bringing it forth. You have bake the cake, motherfucker, kind of thing. And it's much different, much more nefarious, and much more destructive, I would say.
Yeah, and I would notice that Sendak and Bill Cunningham, and I don't know about Annie Leibovitz.
Fran Lebowitz,
rather. Excuse me. But Sendak and Cunningham were of the silent generation, as was Gore Vidal. The generation that was too young for World War II and older than the baby boomers. And they all viewed it as a failure of character. and which is interesting. And that generation viewed homosexuality as a failure of character. And the documentary on Bill Cunningham, I was struck by it. I think it's a very good documentary because Bill Cunningham, for those of you who might not know, he was a street photographer for the New York Times. He was a very famous figure in New York society because he would take pictures of people walking on the streets in Manhattan. And he would use that as a guidepost of where fashion was going. And he viewed the street as the ultimate walkway because he thought that people who are out on the street are actually dressing as they are. That's their real clothes. That's the real fashion that's going on. And people sort of like fought to be taken, have pictures of themselves taken by him because he was an extremely good photographer. He started out as a milliner, a hat maker. And he when hats faded from the fashion scene, he was out of work, and so he turned to photography. And his work is extraordinary because it is objectively very, very good photographs, even though it's rather reduced because he photographed people walking on the street. In terms of themes, it is a rather narrow niche, but an extraordinary achievement. I mean, his work really is extraordinary. And to see it, I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was living in New York City, and it was a pleasure to look at the pictures that Bill Cunningham would put up on Sundays. Sunday or Saturday, I forget. It was the weekend edition. And anyway, just a little background about the man. In the documentary, he's asked about his sexuality. Now, he grew up he was Irish, upscale Irish. And he was very troubled by his sexuality. He nearly broke down in tears when he was interviewed about this issue, but never really discussed it. It was deeply, obviously troubling to the man, his sexuality. And most people who knew him suspected that he had never actually acted on his sexual impulse. He was extremely religious, by the way. And so it was clear that he had this issue of his sexuality, which was in his private life, cordoned off from the rest of his life. And the documentary tried to pierce that barrier. And it was sort of like trying insistently, but at the same time it clearly didn't want to antagonize him as a subject of the documentary. And at the same time also didn't want to hurt him by drawing out the questioning, because he was a very lovable individual. I mean, he was somebody that that anybody would instinctively want to cuddle up and there, don't worry. So there's that vibe that the documentary had of just wanting to know, but at the same time being afraid to hurt his feelings or perhaps have him just storm off, right? But I thought to myself, whose business is it? Who gives a shit? Does it affect the work? No? Yes? I don't know. Who cares? I mean...
What's interesting, and you described the documentary there as being courteous, for lack of a better term, around this topic. They know it's something they have to tiptoe around. It's funny. I'm sure that documentary actually isn't very old, but I suspect now I know exactly what kind of articles would be written about that, or the attitude that would have, which is to say, Bill Cunningham, you're a villain, because in guarding and hiding and being ashamed of your sexuality, you not only, damage yourself, you demean others who have the same ability. So therefore, I punish you. That's the nature of the situation I think we're in. And it's funny to me, even looking back on the guys I know who are flamboyantly gay in the past, even they still didn't operate on this level that you're seeing today. And I'm thinking in particular of a guy I actually really like his writing, Quentin Crisp. John Hurt played him.
Liberace. Liberace is the quintessential.
I know, but I don't want to talk about Liberace right now.
Okay.
My story is about Quentin Crisp. So Quentin Crisp, very much kind of compared to what Oscar Wilde often. He he wore makeup, wore perfume, and all these other things. He basically was like a flamboyant kind of woman, but he didn't necessarily do that just simply because I want all of you to, promote this lifestyle. It's that, he says, this is who I was, and I didn't want to constantly be attacked in the street. It was more about, just wanting to, basically, I choose not to live in fear and I won't be, accosted. He didn't really go out of his way to say, you have to change this law or that law. He just refused to kowtow. And what's interesting when you get him, again, he was in the 80s very popular, as the gay identity became a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they always wanted him to say, like, what do you about gay politics, this, that, and the other. He never really played that game. In fact, he got into trouble with the gay community in the mid 80s when people were dying of AIDS and the gay community was trying to say, hey, we're literally dying here. And he says, like, he was tired of it. He thought he said it was coming across like a fad to talk about how you're suffering from AIDS. And he thought he just dismissed it. And the community was really pissed off at him for that. And they, tried to go out of the way to get him to apologize. And Quentin Crisp was just never kind of guy who would apologize about that. And so that, to me, even the most flamboyant man that you could think of on this front, who actually talks about these subjects openly, if you pressed him, he still doesn't care enough to say, you have to be like me or this has to be promoted in the world. He says, no, I just appreciate it in other people, but I don't think anybody should be like me, and I frankly would be aghast if anybody would. Just like I don't think anybody should be like anybody else. It's somewhat of an individualist approach, but I can at least respect that, he says, I'm going to defend what I'm doing, but I don't really give a shit what you're doing. It doesn't bother me. And that's, even he's out antiquated and outdated in this world. And like your point, Liberace, I mean, everybody, nobody, even if they suspected, nobody even openly said, oh, here comes the fag piano player. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Will convince themselves that, he's just waiting for Sonia Henney to, free up or whatever. I don't know about that, that story, but everybody loved his fucking ass, and he never really brought it up. Even with all the rhinestones, he never brought it up.
No, yeah, and he always denied it. And actually, he sued somebody for libel for claiming that he was gay, and he won back in like the 50s or 60s. I swear to God, look it up. He was just adamant that he was not going to reveal that he was gay. He was just flamboyant. Okay, look, he was clearly gay. It doesn't matter. The issue I find deeply troubling, but I suppose it's just an outgrowth of identity politics, is that you have to reveal things about your personal life in order to be checkmarked as to get your blue check mark in whatever identity you belong to. I mean, like, for instance, in my own case, I suppose I would be considered Hispanic American or Hispanic or Latino or Latinx, which is, by the way, every time I talk to somebody who actually is Latino or actually speaks Spanish, they all cringe at that notion of Latinx. And it's total cultural imposition by an outsider force to say, oh, you're not Latino or Latina, you're Latinx. But anyway.
Latinx to me comes across like the Mexican equivalent of RoboCop. It's Latinx. He's coming for you, and he's going to make sure they don't steal your pesos.
Yeah, he's the robot from Mexico. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually pretty damn funny. But anyway, I'm sorry about that. I found that wildly amusing for some reason. But like, look, I find that idea of oh man, you totally blew my train of thought. Yeah,
that's good. No, I was a success for the night for me.
Good on you. No, seriously. See, this thing. How can I put this? By having to expose your private life, there is nothing that is properly private. Okay.
Yes.
And what is the issue of the distinction between public and private? Naive people say, "Oh, you should just be yourself." I actually did a video. I thought it was idiotic. It's imbecilic to say that you have to be yourself. No. We present different versions of ourselves to different people. And there are certain areas of our life where we need to be able to blow off steam, where there's nobody watching us, nobody cares, or there are walls around us such that nobody can see us, do what we want to do and just relax. And often it's not the things that we want to do to relax are not, they're not nefarious by any stretch of the imagination. They're perfectly quotidian, it's like, look, right now, my kids went to the country, to their grandparents' place, right? when, of course, with my wife. So I've got the apartment to myself. You know what I'm doing? I'm like basically scratching my balls and walking around in my boxer shorts, right? You know, would I do this with the kids around? No, but now I have some privacy and I can do this, right? Would I do this with business associates? Of course not, you know. I'd show up in a nice, tidy suit and maybe a tie if need be, right? But like in the privacy, I have this private space, I'm not doing anything nefarious. I just want to be relaxed. You need that. You cannot be something all the time. You see what I'm saying?
Well, remember when we were talking about hobbies? This fundamentally comes.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same discussion. When you're doing your hobby, it's that private moment. Things that if you discussed it and someone could dismissed it, you'd be embarrassed. Not because what you're doing is horrible to society necessarily. It's just that you're doing it in a private setting, and there's going to be no imposition upon you.
Yeah.
And in some sense, that could take many forms. Some people, the form could be sexually, and in whatever form you want it to take. My attitude always on that front was, if it literally is just in the bedroom, I don't know enough to care, to a certain extent. I mean, in the fact that you even think of it as something. And I'll say this harshly, but to prove the point, if you think of it as something embarrassing that you want to just keep to yourself, but you still feel compelled to do it, fundamentally, that's fine with me. I mean, even the great Catholic theologians of Augustine and Aquinas more or less would say, and they even said this with regard to prostitution, they said it's not an issue big enough to warrant church engineering of the society or demanding that the laws be created to ban it, even if the church says it's a problem. It's not big enough to be a social affair.
Yeah.
And when you keep something that private in the bedroom, you'll eventually have to talk to God about it if that's what you believe. But ultimately, it's just not a social affair, and it's not worth the time. It doesn't raise itself to that.
Yeah.
And I've always had that attitude on that front. And to me, what's the implicit thing about saying literally, if it's in the bedroom or whatever, in the private life, it's off limits, is that notion of limits. It's that, look, society has no position on it one way or another when you've removed it from society. The notion of the bedroom is the idea that I'm closed the doors. Whatever I'm doing here doesn't come out to society, and society doesn't come in. The wall of separation acknowledges that there's a barrier, that there are certain things we just don't do publicly, and they won't be allowed publicly.
Yeah.
Fine. When you break that and you say, well, you have to be proud of all of this, you have to celebrate, you have to push it, we have to make sure that it's taught to children before they're even old enough to know in the public sphere one thing or the other, that assumes society has a say in all of these things. It assumes that society, or the organs of society of political power, can dictate what should or should not be.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Guess who loses on that front? Who is losing historically? It ain't left-wing folks. As much as they want to pretend that they are losing, they don't lose on this. It's the progressive notion of anything goes, and you all have to bake the motherfucking cake. That's it's the right who loses on this front. Never forget that.
I don't think it's so much the right or left that loses. I think it's just people who lose, because you're always on. There's never a moment to relax. You feel when there are eyes on you, and you need a time in your day, in your life, to not have eyes on you, to be wandering around in your boxer shorts and a ratty old t-shirt, scratching your balls and not really caring what you look like, not caring that you're not shaved and your hair is all tousled, right? You need that. You need that ability to relax. And also, here's another issue. You see, in order to grow, it seems to me, you need to be able to be different people. Let me explain. Like for instance, suppose you're John, right? And you're growing as a person. Your political philosophy is changing. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that you're like a left guy, okay? And you're starting to change your opinion. So what would you do? What would be a great way to go about doing is, for instance, might create an avatar, create a separate account, a separate email, and start wandering on the boards of the more fringe right-wing groups, right? Just to explore it and figure things out, especially if you're young, right? When you don't know any better and you're sort of trying things out, trying ideas, ideologies, sort of trying on, different clothes, right? And you'd wander around and be able to see, oh, do I like this? Maybe I like that. But you'd have that freedom because there's that separation, right? But if you are forced to be yourself all the time, then, there's too much fear of change. You don't want to change because if you change, you might lose what you've got. See? I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well on this point, but you need to be able to sort of like disassociate yourself, in a non, psychiatric way, in order to explore different possibilities. And for this dissociated version of yourself to go off, explore different possibilities, and bring back reports of those new lands that you've seen, and perhaps decide to move there, or perhaps decide that no, you're happy where you are. Either possibility is perfectly fine, but you need that ability. And you can only have that ability with privacy. If you don't have privacy, you're always stuck being yourself and you can't move because you're too afraid that you'll antagonize and damage the situation that you currently have. Does this make any sense to you?
The way I would describe it for me, I'll use work language.
Mm-hmm.
The private life is the space where you should be allowed to have intermediate work product. Like intermediate work product, I mean, think about if you're in a job, you like say like a job like mine, you're consulting. Part of it is you're going to produce a report that says, we believe the situation is X, Y, and Z, and you solve it with A, B, and C. Oftentimes we have like 7 or 8 or God knows how many interim versions because our first draft of ideas is roughed out. We're thinking it through. They're like, no, it's more like this, or no, it's more like that.
Exactly.
And the worst thing you'd want is to just say like, oh, the client, let's say the client is the public sphere. See all of that. And because they immediately think, oh, is this final work product? Is this what you really think?
Yeah.
And everything is like, well, you're working it. We will show it to you when we show it to you. If it in fact is something we're going to show to you.
Yeah.
And just like, think about also, it doesn't even have to be like my job. Anything you kind of show to your boss, unless you're, either perfect or an idiot, you don't show them your first draft.
Yeah. Exactly.
You work it out.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the nature of private life. A lot of times it's a human being working things out. And sometimes, we work things out in a way that like, hey, I know like personally I need to vent off steam doing this thing or that thing. And I know the average person doesn't need to and shouldn't feel obliged to have to look at it or experience it. So I keep it there. You'll never know about it. You're perfectly fine. The society will not collapse when you never know about it.
Exactly. That metaphor of the intermediate work product, that's right on the money. That's exactly what I mean. Because that happens all the time. And you need privacy for that. The Romans before, not every Roman, I mean, I'm talking about the more well-off Romans. Their houses were organized such that they had the public area of their home and the private area of their home. And it was there was a clear delineation between the two. And there were only very few and select few people who were invited into the private area of the family's home. I mean, extremely close friends or perhaps extended family members, right? But the business of a family was conducted in the public area of the home. And I think that we need that. And furthermore, it's not just in the home, but in the sense of my deep concern is this push of having like a single, email account tied to each person so that person can be forever tracked across all of the internet, of all online activity. I think that would be catastrophic. We cannot have that. We cannot have that single identity. We need the ability to forge new identities with just a simple throwaway email account and become somebody else and be able to do things like that. Because then it will be exhausting otherwise, that we're constantly under this microscope. Because they want to do this so that they can sell us shit easier, okay? I always think to myself that Minority Report was such a prescient movie because Spielberg said deliberately that the loss of privacy in Minority Report was, his thought was, it's not dystopia, they're just trying to sell you things. And yeah, that's the worst kind of dystopia. Because the reasons for this constant surveillance are just commercial, right? But I think that this commercial impulse is going out of control and it is eroding our ability to have privacy, to just be alone for a while. and not be attacked. I mean, like, I go on random websites, right? And I see the same ads, because they're trying to sell me stuff. And so basically, I know that they're tracking me. They know where I'm going all the time online. And it just drives me nuts. I know it sounds stupid, but I just need like a break. I'm sorry, I'm ranting.
No, it's fine, because think about it. And I laugh because I've seen people comment on this like, well, brands have a right to protect their equity. It's important to them. They need to do that. You just have to accept it. Well, here's the thing. When the public or the private sphere is gone, and they think that's all up to their ideas to say what they want to be associated with and not, there's nothing that's going to stop them from saying, I'm not going to, provide heating to you. Yeah. I'm not going to provide this to you because you went in your private life, you went to, some sort of chat room or Discord where,
you said something naughty. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you didn't play the right game, and like suddenly that's okay for us to disassociate ourselves with you. Again, the notion of the private sphere isn't so much that, although it's a part of it, that you're going to do your own thing independent of prying eyes who may not like it. The point is that they don't have the right to do, engineering upon you, right? They're not going to really dictate it because you've made a compromise with them. It's like, look, I'm not bringing this private stuff necessarily into the public. Once I do, and it's me saying like, here's my policy positions, you make it happen, then we can fight about it at the end of the day. But, when it's just literally, like I said, you're Maurice Sendak, and you have you prefer to fuck men rather than women, but you never really talk about it. It doesn't, should you feel the need to dictate and be subject to the engineering, as it were? Because like I said, and our side is learning this firsthand in the contemporary social setting, it's our points of view that are being subjected to you do bad things. Even if you do the bad things privately, we know like you're doing bad things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's getting a little bit crazy whereby you can have the most egregious behavior and it's celebrated. I mean, really disgusting things, degenerate and decadent things are celebrated. And just entertaining certain ideas, just entertaining them, just talking about them out loud a little bit, just to see where they go. And people will destroy your livelihood because of it. It just seems despicable, but that's the world we're living in.
Like I said, it's funny. I'll bring up again Quentin Crisp. Quentin Crisp does say in his books that yes, when he was a kid, he dressed up in girls' clothing. So be it. It's a lot different. For me, it's materially different from when you have parents taking their drugged out kids in public on the RuPaul's Drag Race show and says, do a little dance, Bobby, do a little dance, kind of thing. And then everybody says, oh, you have to appreciate it. Or you take, one of the transvestites and you plop them into an elementary school and says, dressing like me is proof that you should be free to do what you will. Here's the makeup, darling. I don't know why he sounds like Harvey Fierstein. But so be it. Even Harvey isn't that weird. But that's materially different.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how could I put this? The push for degeneracy and decadence is just exhausting, and I think that part of part of that push is to yank people out of their private sphere and demand that they be public all the time, demand that they be on all the time. And I think that also this urge to yank people out of that which is properly private and into the public makes people even more twisted and perverted. Because if you don't have a time when you can rest and you always feel that you are on, quote unquote, that you're on stage, then you start acting in ways which are unnatural to you. And the tension twists you into something even worse than you would have been. Does this make any sense?
Yes, it does. You are always on performance, as it were, and it's different. I mean, and we're preparing for it, whether we know it or not. Think about how many people who are comfortable with Alexa in your private rooms.
I know.
or even your fucking iPhone, which whether they like it or not is always listening to you. They admit to it.
Yeah.
Now go down the list. That and people are okay with that because they say, well, it just makes shopping more convenient. It's just easier to find things that are appropriate to me. But that always assumes that there is no either other motive of people listening to you, or even the implicit assumption, like I said, that just because Amazon has that data, well, maybe we should take a look at who are the bad people. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
eventually,
inevitable.
Someone say, well,
that step is inevitable. Because because it's going to be done for the common good, for the good of the society. We have access to this information. Let's just listen in a little bit. Let's see if he's thinking of like doing some terrorist activity, or maybe not terrorist activity, maybe just like a naughty thought. And where does it end? You need that division. And yeah, I think that all those Alexa, Siri, all that shit, I fucking hate it. I hate it. Oh.
And I would also emphasize this. At the quote unquote great systems we always set as examples of the totalitarian world that Orwell always documented so well. Nazi Germany, Franco Spain, communist Europe, Eastern Europe, communist China. I'll leave communist China with an asterisk because they're still going. None of them ever had the capability, or frankly the interest even, to have this much level of oversight and control over matters.
Well, China, I would beg to differ.
That's why I said it was an asterisk, because they're still going at it. But during the time, never even came close to this.
The funny thing is that all of this technology that can capture people's information and such, it becomes so much information that it becomes almost pointless, because it's just too much information to manage, right? So what happens is that there is no objective because it's so much information, you can't actually do that much with it, okay? Because it's just simply too much. And therefore, because of it, its actual social utility is reduced. And yet the social damage that it does to people by subconsciously making them feel constrained, even in the most intimate place that they can find, their home, that damage is far greater than any potential utility that this would possibly have. People never make that argument or see that inevitable result of the situation. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, you always worry about the potential, what they could be listening. But the reality is, though, even if all this data is voluminous and you think, oh, there's not much I can do with it, well, the truth of the matter is technology is being developed to make it manageable artificially. So the whole notion of big data and even artificial intelligence is primarily this idea that, there's so much data in an unstructured way, whether or not even all the individual pieces of data are structured, the fact that you are looking at a data set of everything that could, that doesn't just blend well so obviously together. The whole notion, that whole industry is just predicated on the idea that you have a system that goes in there and figures out what it wants to figure out across all these data sets. So, and I know, without going into the details, that solutions, I'm speaking in my own industry's term.
Please.
Techniques and technologies are being developed to find out all there is about you. If I were to say, let's say I had the perfect access to all these creepy data sets that are being built, I could say, find me, what Coach was thinking, or, find me the motivating factors to Coach's politics based on, you could set up whatever parameters. Let's say during the evenings on Wednesdays, you could do that. You could easily do that.
Yeah. Creepy,
and catalog it and come to an understanding of things and whatnot. Yeah. So
well, of course, it wouldn't even be an understanding, because often as not, our more intimate, delicate thoughts are always very nuanced and nuanced to an extent that it's very rare to have somebody truly understand what you're thinking or why you're thinking something. And so their understanding, quote unquote, is that arrogant understanding of the slave owner. It's not the delicate understanding of a friend. It's creepy. It's creepy, and I think that it is dangerous. And we have to now more than ever stand up and make that bright line between that which is public and that which is private, and leave it at that. You know, I mean, you have to respect them. We as a society have to decide. We have to say as a value that we need privacy, and that the veil of privacy between that which is public and that which is private has to be protected at all costs. For if only for our mental health, because I don't think it's good on a mental health level to always be public. You know what I mean?
What I think people on the right and left need to understand is that the private life functions as a release valve for the society. The constant pressure to be on, regardless of this, that, or the other, is very demanding of people. It's just the nature of society, right? You go into your private life and you just say, okay, for these, for this period of time when nobody is going to be in a position to bear the cost of it, of what I'm doing other than me, I'm going to go crazy or do whatever for God knows what, however long period. I'm finished. I'm calm again. I move back into the social world. You don't have that. You get disturbed, twisted psychology coming up. You get people who can't process things. You can't deal with it. I certainly can't make any material or evidentiary claims for this, but I think the increased anxiety you see amongst people in society and the people willing to say, fuck it, I can't handle it, but blow the fuck out of whoever is around me. I don't think, the lack of a private life is helping that.
Yeah. Yeah. I fully agree. That was basically my earlier point. You did it more succinctly. I that inability to just be without eyes on you. But here's the thing too, that I find deeply troubling. You see, a lot of times being able to say some idea out loud demands a level of courage, and anonymity can give you that courage. Because what's the issue of fear? The fear is quite simply that you are concerned, worried, frightened that you will lose something valuable by doing something else, right? And so anonymity allows you to protect that which you consider valuable from the potential damage of what you are going to say. So that's why it's so important to have that level of, that level of anonymity. That level of anonymity that you're, free as a bird and you'll be fine. But if you have people who are deliberately trying to break that, to dox you as they go on, I don't know how many X's it's supposed to have at this point in time, but if they're trying to dox you, if they're trying to get information at you, private information or simply public information that is of a different identity that you have, right? What it is that it's just trying to intimidate you into silence, because what you're saying bothers them. That's the only reason. It's just, and that's the methodology of the jackboots, on the left and the right, because there are people on the right who think sometimes the same, who think that, show yourself, basically, it's basically those people who are afraid that you're going to say things that are true that go against them. And that's why I'm so adamant about the issue of privacy. I mean, if somebody presents themselves as Mr. X and wants to say whatever on the public sphere as Mr. X, let them. Who gives a shit who Mr. X really is? Oh, it turns out that Mr. X is actually John Smith, who has a lawn care business or whatever the fuck, right? Who cares? Is what he's saying making any sense? Is it reasonable? Is it interesting? Is it providing food for thought? I don't even have to agree with what he says to listen to the guy if what he's saying is interesting and makes me think. It doesn't really matter if he's got a lawn care business and somebody's like, oh, he's got a lawn care business and he employs illegal aliens, and here he is as Mr. X saying that we should kick out all the illegal aliens. Who cares? It doesn't matter if they are hypocritical. All that matters is what they are saying, because it provides a better standard. Let me phrase it. It provides more material, more grist for the mill, so that we can think about essential problems. But if people are frightened that they are going to be found out, that people are going to go hunting for who they are in order to expose them, quote unquote, and expose their hypocrisy, quote unquote, then it's pointless. Then you just decide to pack it up. And because of that, potentially valuable points of view are not aired because of fear. Fear created by the bully, and I'm very adamant about this. And as you can tell, I'm very upset because it seems to me that there are so many people who are of that mindset that they have to, quote, expose people for no other reason than to silence them because they don't like them or don't like what they have to say. You see what I'm saying?
Well, sometimes, even that's a better case than what I think often happens is I think for a number of people, it's just entertainment, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I get to, expose someone having two minds on the same issue. And they clearly are wrong. I mean, and even that is the idea that because you expose someone for being a hypocrite, suddenly all the thoughts are negated. It's just a logically stupid idea. All you've shown is that the person has said two contradictory things. It doesn't tell you which one is the right conclusion to reach or not. It just simply says they've made contradictory statements. So
and more often than not, you say contradictory statements about things that are difficult. That's why you say contradictory statements, because you're trying to figure out which one is the right one. It's like you said, it's intermediate work product. Oh God.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, and like I said, I'm of two minds on this front because I think the notion of a private-public distinction is a give and take situation, which is a healthy give and take. So what do you get when you're from the private side? Well, those in the private, you have that zone of unmolestation, the zone of venting steam, the zone that recognizes, hey, we don't have complete control over this matter. The recognition in some regards that the society as it is at this current point in time does not have the answers on all things in all times and for perpetuity. So they said, you're going to work it out, whatever. We accept, there are limits to our control. But on the public side, what do you get as well? Well, on the public side is you could say, look, here are the rules that we have. And, we know that there are certain things, and I'm thinking less on like points of view, thoughts, opinions. I'm thinking more on like certain actions like, you're gay versus straight. You like this kind of sexual, activity versus other kinds of sexual activity. You can say, look, we have our public rules of how you're going to conduct yourself. That the stuff that we don't think is going to be supportive of this society, it's not going to come into it. We'll give you the private life because we know that there's going to be certain type of people who just cannot get out of that, that activity, that point of view, what have you. You're going to have the zone to just deal with it. But it's also a zone where, you're not going to bring it into the public sphere. We have the right to say, nope, sorry, we're not talking about that. We're not going to encourage that. If you do something stupid in public, we'll, I don't know, put you in the drunk tank or whatever for a while. You get that as well. You get that, that bit of separation, because when you don't have that private life, you get the tranny, teachers in your elementary school situation that they have to be here.
Yeah.
We all have to encourage that. I mean, and that's the, the other, nefarious part is you don't have the healthy give and take of society and individual. And yes, I know I've recently been on the tactic of saying, well, look, we're overrating the individual. But when I say the individual is being overrated, I'm not saying the individual has zero value.
Yeah.
Or there's zero reason to have notions of individuality. They do exist. It's simply that the pendulum has swung so far to that direction. It's just deteriorating any semblance of social order.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think this notion of the evisceration between the public and private has been detrimental to the individual.
Yes.
It harms it too much. But going back to something else that I've been thinking about, because we've been talking basically about three stages: the public, the private, and the intermediate work stage, a work product stage, right? Which is basically when you're developing stuff. There's something else I think, through time. Let me put it this way. When I was 16, what's the age that kids get online pretty much now? 13, 16, around then, right? Okay.
Younger.
Yeah, or younger. When I was 13, 16, I was one person, a very, very different person than I am today. A vastly different person. Because I was a boy, I was a child. And of course there were developments and there were bumps in the road. And the great thing about my own upbringing is that I was able to leave it behind. I was able to leave behind the mistakes I made and the stupid things I said and did. And they never haunted me. But today, because of the technology that we have, you can never leave it behind. You can never turn your back on a version of yourself and start fresh, because it's always going to be haunting you. And this is a truly frightening thing about social media and your online existence. You can never, there was that thing, go west, young man, and grow up with the country. Yeah, but you can't do that now. You cannot go west. You cannot go to a new frontier, a new land, and just become a different person, a different man, a better man. You can't. Because, it happens in a life of a man that you are in a period of your life and you act and behave in a certain way. Perhaps not the best way, perhaps in a very bad way, in a low way. And this happens to everybody. And at some point, you're able to say, I'm going to move, I'm going to change cities. And change cities, change jobs, and leave this shell of who I am behind. And in the next place you go to, you think back on how you were and you try consciously to be better. And this is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. But it can only happen if you can leave behind the old life. But what if you can never leave behind the old life? What if you're stuck with that old life forever? Like a chain around your ankle, right? An albatross around your neck.
Well, yeah, there's an absurdity in saying, let's say you went to someone, it's like, oh, well, you've professed opinions in your 30s, but I happen to have an Amazon book review you posted in 2003 saying something very different when you were 16, 17.
Yeah.
Speak to why we should trust you now. It's like, well, because I'm no longer 16 or 17 should be the answer for that.
Yeah, exactly. But now
that level of
the
level of sophistication is gone.
Yeah, exactly. Subtlety of nuance, but the funny thing is that, see, you need that clean break in order to truly grow, because you grow by leaving behind what was old. But if you're always stuck with it, then you can never really grow. You're always just developing, but you're going to have to contort yourself in order to accommodate this previous version of yourself. The metaphor I'm thinking is of a shell. You know how the shell of a snail, it's a spiral, on the golden ratio, right? And the shell grows on the smaller shell. It's always a continuation, but it just spirals around. It's not like a snake that leaves behind its old skin and moves on and becomes a different snake. Okay, and I understand, the snake is not the best metaphor, but it's the only one I can think of in this, trying to anthropomorphize the things that we're discussing. But like a snail is always stuck with his shell. It just grows, but it just spirals around. But it's the same thing. And the snake is able to move on.
Well, it's part of the infantilizing aspect of this society, because you are fully documented. It is, and I'll explain what. You have to let me explain why.
Mm-hmm.
When you are tied to all previous iterations of yourself,
mm-hmm.
there is no change. The very fundamental nature of growing older is change. The metamorphosis, yes, the great epic poem from Latin by Ovid,
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally is predicated in part on this idea that the life is constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're tied to all of these things from the past, they say, oh, this, that, or the other, or we're constantly on record and we'll hold all of these things against you no matter what you do. You will forever be locked in non-change.
Yeah.
And that is infantilism.
Yeah. Yeah, but the way you phrased it, I thought that you were starting it as a forget about it. Doesn't matter. It's too long to explain and not worth it. But yeah, exactly, and I agree your point. I agree completely with your point. Well, to add to that point that you've just made, look at how people dress, like children, like college kids. The grown people dress like college kids, like they're still like on campus, especially the more educated classes. Yeah, sometimes they wear suits and ties because they have to, like in your line of work, for instance. But I would bet that, there are more and more of those casual Friday days. There are casual Mondays and casual Tuesdays and casual Fridays, right?
Every day is casual Friday, to be perfectly honest.
Really? So they've just given up the ghost on dressing nice nowadays?
Some places are a little bit more conservative, but by and large, in our world, I mean, yeah. First off, ties have forever gone.
They're gone.
That's one issue.
Oh.
Ties are forever gone. Sport coats, very rare. Usually only when you're presenting to clients, if that. In the office, the most strict rule that you're going to see is, oh, we have a client presentation coming in today. Wear a collared shirt and slacks or of some kind, right? But by and large, I've seen people wear jeans to the office, polo shirts, gym shoes. On Fridays they say, fuck it, it's the summer, we're just wearing in shorts to the office. It's like it's like you never left the dorm in some regard. There's like a handful of rules, but very, very few are really held fast.
I just don't understand that way of dressing. Like, I've gotten to a stage and a point in my career when there are two kinds of people that I have to deal with at this point in my life. Either service people for me, professional service people, lawyers, accountants, what have you. And they're going to go dressed however I want, but I usually go like, a sports jacket, button-down shirt, khakis, and maybe jeans even. But it doesn't really matter because it's just they're going to give me something, and the people that I meet, they're dressed up nice. Yeah. But if I actually have to go and talk to somebody, about money issues, that maybe they'll give me money for something that I want, for some project I'm doing or whatever, then it's a suit and tie, obviously. I have several suits and ties. I mean, it's just, the way things are. And, maybe I'm just old-fashioned. Maybe I'm just behind the times. I cannot believe I've just said that maybe I'm old-fashioned. Oh, well.
Oh, maybe? Well, maybe.
No.
Yes, we're talking about traditionalists. Are you old-fashioned? Maybe.
Yeah. No,
it's the line from Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence. And They say like, "Oh, how will I explain that you can't come up to Madame Olenska's house? Well, should I just say, oh, you can't do it and invite her?" He says, just say I'm old-fashioned. She'll understand.
Yeah.
That's all is needed to be said.
Yeah. I am deeply troubled by this because, see, in my own case, I grew up with this zone of privacy, this zone where I could be a child or an adolescent and it would not have a detrimental impact on my life. And I feel that young people today, children today, do not have that opportunity, that they have to be on all the time. They don't have this zone of privacy where they can develop, where they can make mistakes and be foolish, and it doesn't matter, I mean, in my own case, when I was growing up, when I was an adolescent, I got into all kinds of trouble. And by just sheer luck, I didn't get arrested or anything because I was kind of like a bad boy, but not like a bad boy like I was cool bad boy. I was kind of like an idiot bad boy of just doing crazy shit just out of not even impulsivity, but it was more initially like, ooh, this would be cool. Let's try it, or thoughtlessly. It's just perfectly natural. I mean, that's the whole point of adolescence, right? But the thing is, see, today, you can't do that. And back in my time, even, if I'd been caught, if I'd been arrested for some of the stuff that I'd done, it would be on my record and it would affect me. Things that I did when I was 14, 15, 16 years old would have been on my permanent record and it would have ruined opportunities into the future. Now, that's bad enough, okay? But now it just seems that that's worse. Because, the boy you were at 14 and the man you are at 25, okay? They're radically different. They're completely different. But now you don't have that ability to make mistakes anymore, which I think is tragic because I think that the best people of our generation are the ones who make mistakes when they're young, who fuck up and do all kinds of stupid shit that later they wouldn't dream of doing, but that they had to go through that period of doing it in order to discover who they were. But now you can't fuck up, or if you fuck up, your opportunities are gone, and therefore those men don't become the leaders of our society. It's the ones who fucked up and learned who ought to be the leaders of our society, not the ones who never failed because they were too timid or too compliant to fail. It's the ones who fuck up and go from fuck up to fuck up during their adolescence until finally it starts to knock some sense into them. And by the time they're 25, 30, 40, they got their shit organized and they know what's what. And because of their failures and mistakes and the scraps they got into, they are able to have a level of experience that is beneficial to the society as a whole. You see what I'm saying? And that's
well, this
gone.
is why I say that it's a situation where the right suffers more than the left, because when you have, someone who goes through the testing process to say, oh, I fucked up, 95 times before I got the 96th time to figure out how the light bulb works.
Right.
You deny someone the ability to say, I've learned from these failures and I know what will succeed, and thus you have a hierarchical success and structure of the people who worked their way to these more beneficial conclusions, reach the heights of society, and we kind of separate, stratified down below. When you don't have that mechanism of failure and learning from failure and building upon it, and everything is sort of like, you're constantly stuck in the present. You're constantly, we remember every fuck up that you did, and we always hold everything against you, if you will, or we use that against any ability to say you should focus on this versus that, because someone can say, oh, you fucking hypocrite because 20 years ago you farted twice when you said only fart once. You prevent those structures, those hierarchical, structures from forming in any kind of way, any kind of notions of success that's not distributed. And you're just in that, static of, oh, I'm just good being who I am, whatnot. Well, when your ideology doesn't give a shit about anything and you say like, oh, whatever, nothing is more valuable than any other thing. Well, then this perpetuates that as long as you want. And, you be like as, just like peas in a pod and happy as can be. And you're the little tuber at the bottom of the ocean, content that there's a continual source of food and energy for you, and you never have to see the sunlight.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that this is sort of like the perfect end point for the podcast.
It is.
Yeah. This has been more like a bowling podcast than a tennis match podcast. Do you think?
You'll never let me live down that metaphor.
No, I think it's a terrific metaphor. Dear audience members, what happens is that Benway and I, when we were starting the podcast, we were saying that, that the best podcasts that we do are sort of like tennis matches where, one hits against the other, right? And but then sometimes we do like bowling podcasts where one talks and the other waits, and then then they switch around, and then like bowling, right? But the thing is, see, like I feel that this podcast, it's hard to get meta, but this podcast has been a bowling one, but I think it's been very fruitful, to tell you the truth, because I think that both of us have been thinking about this shit a lot. And this has been sort of like an opportunity to lay out the ideas on the table. Because I'm actually surprised by how much you're talking about this stuff and the ideas that you're bringing up, and how many ideas I have about this issue. I hadn't realized I'd been thinking and grinding about this issue so much, and how it connects to a lot of other issues that we've been discussing as of late. I mean, specifically the issue of being tethered, which I think is part, because I think that all of this lack of privacy has to do with the convenience of technology that's arisen over the last 20, 30 years. This technology is so convenient, and that it's just insinuated itself into our lives, and we have to somehow stop it. So we have to figure out a way to say, okay, we have to build Faraday cages in our lives. You know what a Faraday cage is?
Why don't you explain it for the audience?
Oh, okay. Faraday cage is a cage design, named by a guy called Faraday, I suppose. I don't actually know the origins of it, but it's basically if you line a room with basically chicken wire and ground it, no electromagnetic waves will enter it. It becomes a cage that is free from any electromagnetic radiation, specifically telephony, the mobile telephony and Wi-Fi and all that jazz, right? And so it's a place that is internet free, Wi-Fi free, phone signal free. And it's a place where you can relax. We have to build that specifically. We have to, we have to build that model of what we want. We want to build Faraday cages in our lives, where it's privacy and just being disconnected, untethered. Just leave me alone. Just areas of our lives where we are truly free, because we think that we are free. But we're not. We're constantly, we're captured. We're not free. Oh yeah. I don't know if I'm ranting at this point.
You were, but that's But we get the idea.
Yeah.
I think it's time for my final statement is, for whatever my recommendation is, it would be keep it to yourself.
Yeah, that's a smart move. Yeah, closed mouth catches no flies. Yeah, exactly right. Shut the fuck up and keep it to yourself, and that's the best advice. And so with that best advice from Dr. Benway, as always, I'm going to call it a podcast. This has been the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill signing off for my co-host, Dr. Benway. Thank you so much for having listened to us, and we will catch you next time.
Be seeing you.
Yes, definitely seeing you.